Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Welcome to episode 150 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the Observer's Notebook and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thank you for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can start by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can help us out by going to www.patreon.com/observersnotebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. Find out more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And we're also on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, commemorating our 75th anniversary of the ALPO with one of our longtime lunar and planetary observers. Hope you enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to episode 150 of the Observer's Notebook. And it's another in our 75th anniversary of the ALPO. And today we're very lucky to have with us ALPO member, lunar and planetary astronomer, and recent recipient of the Overbeck Medal for its outstanding astronomical work in South Africa. And also our most recent 2022 Walter Haas Observers Award recipient during our latest conference. That means we're talking to Clyde Foster. Welcome, Clyde.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me on the show. An absolute pleasure. And let me just kick off by saying how much I appreciate the award from ALPO this year. It means an awful lot to me, and I really appreciate the awards committee and yourself for the award, Tim.
Well, thank you very much. It was well deserved, and a few people think it was a long time coming too for you, so that was good. Before we get into it, though, why don't you just give everybody a little bit of background about yourself?
No, 100%, Tim. Born in Liverpool in the UK, 1957. Just stayed in Liverpool just for a few short years, and the family moved to the south of Manchester. Normally keep very quiet about my Liverpool roots because I'm a fanatical Man United supporter. We stayed for a few years, and both my parents are Scottish or were Scottish. So I've got a very strong Scottish heritage, and we actually moved back up to the Motherwell area between Glasgow and Edinburgh for a few years. That was in the late 1960s. And in fact, that's where my interest in astronomy was born. When we moved up to Scotland, there was a teacher's strike on, interestingly enough, and we were then required as young schoolgoers to do a project. And we weren't allowed to do the project on our football team because that would have been first choice for most young boys. But obviously with the Apollo missions on the go and the race to the moon, I started off a project with space travel. And whereas we were meant to do one project book over the course of a term, I ended up producing 5 project books.
Oh my.
And during that exercise, my interest refocused from space travel to actually astronomy. And that was really what got me up and going as a youngster. And it's been an ongoing interest of mine throughout my life. As I'm sure we'll get to it just now. Obviously, the last 8 years have taken on a much more serious aspect in terms of my interests. But yeah, we in 1970, my dad was offered a position with Marconi Marine out in Durban in South Africa. And after World War II, he'd been in the Merchant Navy. He went on various shipping journeys around the world, and he actually stopped in Durban back in the late 1940s. And that's actually where he got my mom's engagement ring.
Oh.
And he loved Durban. So when he was offered the opportunity, we packed up as a family and then came out to South Africa. I went through high school there, got my chemical engineering degree at the University of Natal. And yeah, I had what I would consider a reasonably positive and successful career as a chemical engineer, eventually retiring in 2016. And really from 2014, when I bought the C14, that's really where the serious aspect of my planetary imaging and involvement in the pro-am community kicked in.
Okay, you really jumped in with both feet at that point, didn't you?
Sorry?
You jumped in with both feet at that time into astronomy.
And both arms, head.
Very good. Now, you mentioned the teacher strike and you had to do projects. Was that the event, or you were talking about the Apollo program? What event or person actually sparked your interest in astronomy?
There was no specific person at the time. I was obviously aware of Patrick Moore and the programs on TV back in those days. But it was really I'd started reading books, took paper clippings, and that all formed part of the project. So I don't think I can say anyone specific. What I did have, though, Tim, was tremendous support from both my mom and my dad. And within a year of me showing interest in astronomy, my dad bought me my first telescope, small little refractor. But the book that it came with, there was a moon map, and there was also a book. Can't remember. I've got it on my bookshelf here, but I can't remember the name offhand. But I've still got that book. The telescope is obviously long gone.
Right.
But both my mom and my dad were seriously encouraging.
That's great.
Of my interests.
That's great. That's really good. And your first telescope said was a small refractor, like a 60 millimeter or something like that, probably.
Yeah, probably an inch and a half.
I think we all started there too at the time. Yeah, it's crazy. What about a dream telescope? If you could, I know you have C14 now, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what if you had any telescope you wanted? What would you really like to have?
Tim, that's been something seriously on my mind over these last couple of years. There's obviously financial aspects with me in retirement, and sure, I would say either a 400 millimeter classical Cassegrain, maybe, obviously a specialist planetary telescope, or maybe a DK. I think from a financial perspective, if I do get there, I think some of the leading planetary imagers are putting exceptional images out with like 0.5 meter Newtonians with excellent optics. So yeah, maybe a 400 to 500 millimeter Newtonian with really good optics.
Interesting. I would have thought, being a planetary guy, you would have hedged toward a refractor.
Yeah, I think in terms of the work that we're doing, I think there's very few leading planetary images that are using refractors. I think aperture is a big issue, Tim.
It's the key now.
I would say so. And the Schmidt Cassegrains, and I think the bigger Newtonians are pretty much the tools of choice at this stage.
Okay, all right. Well, you mentioned the ALPO, and how did you first get involved with the organization?
Tim, things developed. I think it's a bit of a story. Once I got the C14, I was aware of a few of the leading planetary images. Chris Go and Damian Peach in particular were huge influences on my early development with the online tutorials and YouTube videos that they'd put out. And as I was starting to take images, my first connection had always been I'd been a member of the BAA on and off over the years, and quite honestly, I wasn't aware of too many other astronomical societies. The Webb Society also in the UK had been of interest to me when I was young, when I was looking at deep sky objects. And so my first connection was with the BAA, and I started submitting images regularly to the section directors there. And then I became aware of the ALPO Japan database, and I started submitting there. And of course, the online interaction built up fairly quickly. And somewhere in that process, I became aware of the ALPO as well. And then I started building up the relationships with Julius Benton, Richard Schmood, in terms of the specific planets that I was interested in. And those were basically started off with Mars, and then Jupiter and Saturn. And I started submitting my images to the international databases, including the PVOL European database. And what was tremendous was the building up of the relationships with the various people in the organizations. And I think I've developed very close bonds with the directors or heads of the ALPO sections, which I greatly appreciate. And I've actually got a couple of Julius's books on my shelf, I think, and Richard, I think, just looking across. So it was wonderful for me, being a relatively new in the game planetary imager, to have direct contact with these highly regarded and highly esteemed contacts in the community. And I'm glad to say that those relationships have built up very, very positively.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So you've been into astronomy since you were a kid. What are some of the major advances you've seen in amateur astronomy?
Look, for many, many years, I think that's the way that life goes. Obviously, I took my career very, very seriously. And I think I can fair to say that I went a bit above and beyond. And that brought its own pressures over the years in terms of family, etc. But then I've got two wonderful children, a young boy and a girl, both in their 30s now, so they're not that young, but two wonderful kids. Got a wonderful relationship with them. So my career and my family really took precedence over the years, Tim. And, the development of my astronomy was fairly informal. and I just didn't have the time. But as the years went by, I gradually got. I was in a position where financially I could get bigger and better telescopes, and I dabbled, if you can say, in my astronomy, until the point where I took the very serious decision in terms of the C14, and that just put me on a totally different track altogether.
Yeah, that path you took, that story is very similar to a lot of people I talked to on this podcast. That they had an interest in their youth, and then life happens, and then when you get older, you have the means to really dive into the hobby, or any hobby. A lot of people, I have friends that are into trains. They were into trains when they were young. They got away. Now they have a house, and now they built a train set in their backyard. So it's the same type of thing. You find if you have the love for it, it sticks with you. And then when you're finally able to get to it, it's there for you. Which is kind of nice. Which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So you had a spot named after you. Can we talk about Clyde's spot?
Absolutely. Something I'm very, very proud of. And, as an amateur astronomer, I don't know if there's anything that can pair with something like that, Tim. So as my interaction with the Pro-Am Planetary community built up, I became aware, and in fact, I was invited by one of my colleagues, Marc Delcroix, in France, who has very strong links in the Pro-Am community. And he made me aware of the NASA Juno mission to Jupiter, which went into orbit at Jupiter in 2016. And the mission team had put certain principles or philosophies in place where they wanted Pro-Am or citizen science involvement from the public. So they'd gone out on the specific Juno website, Juno mission. I think two primary requests from their side was that they were quite happy to put the images from the spacecraft out in public so that people could apply their artistic license to interpreting and processing the images, which are, I'm sure you're aware, the Juno images are just insanely amazing. And another aspect of the interaction with the amateur community was that, as you may know, the Juno spacecraft is in a highly elliptical 53-day orbit. So it swings way out from Jupiter and then swoops in low over the cloud tops every 53 days on the Perijove close flybys. And those typically, the spacecraft is coming in typically in the range of 4,000 kilometers above the cloud tops. It's just remarkable. But the spacecraft is not in a position where it can give a global view of the planet in its entirety. So one of the requests from the NASA Juno mission team was for the amateurs to image the planet approximately a week before and then during and then up to a week after the Perijove flyby to allow global context of these close-up images that the spacecraft is taking. So myself and a number of amateurs across the world have dropped into a bit of a routine of every 53 days or give or take a week to try and capture the path of the spacecraft, because it's obviously a very narrow path that it flies over, being so close to the planet, to identify any interesting features that the spacecraft may pick up during its flyby. So on PJ27, Perijove 27, that's exactly what I was doing 2 days before the flyby. I was specifically imaging that the track of the spacecraft, which would fly fairly close to the Great Red Spot on that specific flyby. And I was going through my normal routine of capturing red, green, blue images repeatedly to produce a color image of Jupiter. And then over the last couple of years, I've dropped into infrared imaging. So I took my infrared captures. And then we also, in the planetary community, are using more and more methane captures at 890 nanometer wavelength. And whereas on screen, when I was looking at or capturing the data, I really couldn't detect anything particularly unusual in the color captures and the infrared. But as soon as I turned the filter wheel to the methane wavelength, I could see straight away that there was something unusual between the Great Red Spot and Oval BA. There was this bright spot. And my first thought was that it was possibly an impact.
Okay.
Because we obviously, again, the community is quite dedicated in terms of trying to detect impacts on Jupiter, and there's been some success there. And but I sat and I watched it, and it just remained. So I realized that it wasn't. Then, of course, the next thing is you just check quickly whether it's maybe one of the satellites, the moons. And I quickly ruled that out. And so I actually was capturing quite good data. The conditions were actually quite good. So I very quickly started circulating specifically the methane image. And of course, that generated quite a bit of excitement because at that stage, I was communicating directly with the NASA mission team, Dr. Glenn Orton and his colleagues. And it was obvious that the spacecraft would be able to capture this feature 2 days later. Mm-hmm. And what the methane wavelength does, Tim, is that features that are bright are actually high in the Jovian atmosphere. So, for example, the Great Red Spot shows as bright because the upper levels of the Great Red Spot are elevated in the Jovian atmosphere. So it was very quickly identified that this was a convective, quite aggressive storm system that had popped up. Now, Andy Casely in Australia had captured, he didn't have very good conditions, but he captured the same region about 10 hours earlier, one rotation of Jupiter, and there was nothing visible where this bright spot was. So effectively, in those 10 hours between Andy's capture and mine, this storm had erupted vigorously in the upper atmosphere of Jupiter, and I was obviously able to see it and circulated the images. The NASA team was obviously very excited, and I think the rest is history. Juno captured these amazing views of the storm. Funny enough, Paul Maxon, I think he's also a Haas Award winner.
Yep.
He first coined the term Clyde spot within a day, I think, of me detecting it. And of course, other amateurs started imaging it,
right.
But I was obviously credited with the initial detection in methane band. And NASA obviously played the role. They put out a press release within a month of the flyby, and I was expecting a mention maybe of the storm. And they headlined the press release Clyde spot on Jupiter.
That's fantastic.
And of course, that was that just drove a lot of publicity and general interest. Tim, a year later, Juno flew over the storm, which had taken on a new structure, and they put out a second press release, Juno returns to Clyde Spot. So those two press releases obviously meant a lot in terms of publicity.
Oh, yeah, that type of thing just gives you the personal satisfaction that all those years at the eyepiece and at the computer processing these images pays off in something like this. It's more than money. It really is. It's the recognition. The recognition is really awesome. I mean, that's
that I keep on saying, yes, it's extremely rewarding. But at the end of the day, I think myself and the colleagues that I work with in this community, we're out there night after night, primarily because we love what we're doing. I think
you're right.
I think that's the key driver for us. But for me, at this stage of my life, I'm in my mid-60s now, and to feel that you can make a contribution, a serious contribution, in terms of planetary science and interaction with the professional planetary science community is something very, very special and important to me. And not only with the professional community, but obviously my fellow colleagues in the amateur planetary imaging community. And but to have your contribution and your work recognized and acknowledged in terms of something like this, and not only something like this, but the various awards that I've been very privileged to receive, means an awful lot. I keep on saying, it's not the reason why we do it, but at the same time, it keeps the fires of your enthusiasm burning that little bit brighter. I think when your contribution is acknowledged, and let me just say, in terms of Clyde Spot, what was the general interest and general publicity was nice, but for me, and I hope I'm not stepping on anyone's toes here, but the planetary science group at the University of Bilbao in Spain, Dr. Agustin Sanchez Lavega and his team have formally researched the Clyde Spot over the period of about 2 years. And of course, one of the key guys in that team is Ricardo Hueso. And earlier this year, there were 2 papers published formally, and the fact that Clyde Spot the term is accepted in those formal papers, I think is, what it means to me is that Clyde Spot is now recorded in formal scientific literature and formal Jovian scientific literature. And as I say, as an amateur, I don't know if you can even dream a story like that up.
That's I have no words. That's pretty awesome. The recognition you get for something like that, like I said, I have no words for it. It's amazing. Yeah. So you've done this. Where do you go from here?
Sure, Tim. We just got back from Namibia. I spent the last 6 weeks in Namibia, and for the first time in these 8 years, I've been seriously distracted from my planetary imaging. You won't see any recent images from me. But the reason for that 6 weeks was that we had applied for permanent residence in Namibia, and pleased to say that last Wednesday I received all the formal documentation finalized, formalized. So myself and Marina, my wife, we'll spend the next 6 weeks packing everything up here, including dismantling the observatory. And we are moving onto a farm in the Gamsberg region, which is about 100 kilometers southwest of Windhoek. You've got the Gamsberg Mountain. And the first time I heard about the Gamsberg was when a couple of years ago, when I was in discussion with Damian Peach, and I was aware that he'd done extensive investigation across the world as to where were the best conditions for planetary imaging. And of course, you may be aware he heads off to Barbados.
Right.
You've got laminar on onshore flow, giving exceptionally stable conditions, even at sea level. And I asked him, did he look at any regions in southern Africa? And he mentioned the Gamsberg. And in fact, the Gamsberg Mountain itself has been identified for many, many years as a prime astronomy region. In fact, at one stage, some of the large telescopes that have now ended up in Chile, they were looking to put at the Gamsberg in Namibia. But because of political reasons back in those days, that didn't happen, unfortunately. But you've got the International Amateur Observatory, which is run by the Germans. They've got facilities on top of the Gamsberg Mountain and also at the Hakos Astro Farm at the bottom of the Gamsberg, but still it's about 1,800 meters altitude. Okay. And we were introduced to a farmer who's got two huge farms. The combined area of the two farms, I think, is 24,000 hectares. So they're huge. And we've arranged with them that we will move into one of the secondary farm houses on the farm. In fact, where the Hess Observatory is currently located, which is an impressive facility, a gamma ray observatory operated by the Max Planck Institute from Germany. The primary telescope there, the CT5, has got an equivalent diameter of 28 meters. Oof. So it's really impressive facilities, and we'll be on the same farm as the Hess Observatory. But it's there's a number of reasons why we looked at that. It's not only my personal astronomical interest, but that obviously had quite a strong influence. Tim, Marina grew up on a farm in South Africa, so she's used to farm life. Mm-hmm. And at this stage of our lives, to be out, I'm a great outdoor person, always have been. So to live out in that environment for these coming years, however long we're spared, is something that we're really, really looking forward to. The IAS is about half an hour's drive from our place on the farm. And during the last few weeks, I formalized my membership there, and that will give me access intermittently to some very nice telescopes in the 0.5 meter to 0.8 meter diameter range. Wow. Typically Newtonians, which have produced some very nice planetary images. So that'll supplement my regular imaging with the C14.
That's fantastic. You'd be living the dream, you know?
Yeah. Look, you asked what's the way forward. I think I'm dedicated to following the path that I'm on. Look, we're going to Bortle 1 skies. Wow. So to not dabble in deep sky is going to be difficult, I think. But having said that, my planetary imaging is almost a full-time occupation for me, or pastime. Interestingly enough, the signpost for the Tropic of Capricorn is literally 21 kilometers south of the farm. So we're just north of the Tropic of Capricorn, which practically means that the planets can't really go much lower than about 44 degrees for me under the worst possible conditions. And I believe at 44 degrees, I should still be able to contribute, hopefully, some reasonable images. Second aspect, in terms of the way forward, I haven't shared too openly, but I am busy writing a book on my experiences and my journey into planetary imaging. I see it as a tribute. Hopefully, once it's done, it'll be a bit of a tribute to the community, the pro-am planetary community that I'm very much part of. That's how I see it.
That's fantastic. And when the book comes out, please let us know, and we'll have you on the podcast to talk about it.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a bit of a long-term project, not least of all just purely because of the time commitment that I have with my regular imaging. And a further question that's been in my mind, because I've obviously been a co-author on a number of papers now, professional papers, and the question is whether I don't actually explore maybe some formal studies in planetary science. But again, it's something, it would be purely for my own personal satisfaction, Tim. But again, I wouldn't want that to distract from my primary objectives in my imaging.
Oh, I hear you. Yeah. And you really bring to light what I really love about astronomy is unlike other sciences, amateurs can collaborate with professionals on every level in this hobby. And that's what I love about it. I mean, your observations have been used by NASA, they're used in professional papers. And that's just, you don't see that in other hobbies, and astronomy is really, you're able to do it with amateur equipment,
Tim, if I can just share a few little things. When I mentioned Mark Delcroix a little bit earlier regarding the Juno mission, but it was Mark that in early 2017, I'd been pumping out Mars images for the previous 2.5 years, and I'd obviously developed a little bit of a reputation in terms of consistent submissions, not necessarily the best images, because they weren't the best images, but that it was a learning curve. And he proposed that I attend the European Planetary Science Congress, which was going to be held in September that year in Latvia, Riga, Latvia. And I nearly fell off my chair when I saw that email. And I said, "No, how can you talk like this?" And there was obviously a pro-am session at that conference. And he said, "Well, look, there's other presentations in that the pro-am section on the other planets, but no one's really doing anything on Mars. You're the Mars guy. Come and talk."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, okay, but sorry, I just can't afford this." And then it came out that the Europlanet Society, who obviously drives the EPSC conferences or congresses every year, they provide some funding to amateurs such as myself and other professionals. I was able to attend that year and present, and I followed that up with various other international presentations in London and Geneva. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to Spain this year because of the whole Namibia thing. But if I can just give you one very brief anecdote from when I arrived in Riga. I'd obviously met John Rogers previously from the BAA, and we were sitting in the pub in the restaurant, or not in the restaurant, in the hotel. And I'd already been introduced online to Dr. Glenn Orton of the the NASA Juno mission team, and we were sitting having drinks at the bar, and then this chap walked up, and obviously John and Glenn both knew him very, very well, and they introduced me to him. And this gentleman, he looked at me and he said, "You're Clyde from South Africa." And I wasn't quite sure how to take it, but I said yes. And he went on to express his appreciation for the contribution that I was making to the professional planetary science community. Now, this gentleman that I've just been introduced to was Dr. Lee Fletcher from the University of Leicester, who is very well known, although I didn't know it at the time, as one of the leading planetary scientists in the study of the atmospheres of the gas giants. Just out of interest, he's a visiting astronomer on the James Webb Telescope as well.
Oh, okay.
So extremely highly regarded. And it was only when I realized who I was actually talking to did things start clicking into place, that I was on an amazing journey. I didn't know where it was going, but I was on a train heading in an amazing direction. And that's been the story of these last few years to have. And I've had it when I was in Geneva. I was sitting at the back of one of his presentations. There was one of the larger presentation halls, and he was giving his presentation, and there was, next minute, there was spacecraft images, Hubble, but then a few of my images popped up as well. And then in the middle of his talk, he pointed at the back there. He said, "Yeah, I see Clyde at the back there." And great job that he's doing, supporting the professional community. And that's just insane, but it's something that I appreciate in terms of the work that I'm doing is being acknowledged and appreciated,
and the motivation that gives you as well to strive to go even further and better. And it's there, man. It's, yeah.
As I say, it just keeps the fires burning a little bit brighter and hotter than they maybe would have been. It's wonderful.
That's fantastic. Wow. Is there any additional information you'd like to share with our listeners about yourself and your experiences?
Sure. I think we've covered most of the stuff, Tim. As I say, what's important to me is number one, the enjoyment. You can't be out there night after night, sometimes having horrible seeing conditions, and just continuing without that enjoyment that you get. Every time I see one of those planets come on my computer screen in the observatory, you just feel that little bit of a buzz as to whether there's anything new that's gonna be visible or not. So I think from that perspective, the main thing is the personal enjoyment that myself and my colleagues get out of this. But for me, at this stage of my life, to feel that I can contribute in the way that I'm doing is another key driver for me. It's wonderful. I think a lot of people, when they're retired, if I don't know what they do. If they don't have an interest like this, but to me, it's a new life that I find myself on. And quite honestly, I don't think we would have considered, the Gamsberg region of Namibia, unless I had found myself on this track. And as I say, there's other drivers for us to go there, but certainly my planetary imaging is a major factor as well.
It's true, and you obviously have a very understanding spouse too, who appreciates your knowledge in astronomy, and that you've said in here that family comes first for you too. So that's great.
Absolutely. And then I have to really express my appreciation to Marina. Again, without her support, I think she's enjoyed, seeing the awards and the publicity, and I think she's proud of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's not easy when I'm trying to sneak out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Well, at least she knows where you're going.
Okay, correct. And I won't come back in drunk either.
There you go. Well, this has been an honor to speak with you. It was an honor to present you with the award at the conference this year. It's definitely well deserved. And we thank you in the ALPO for your work. We really do. And I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Awesome, Tim. Yeah, very much appreciate, as I said earlier, the various relationships that I've built up within the ALPO. And I'm hoping that will continue for many years.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook. I again want to thank our special guest, Clyde Foster, for coming on the podcast today. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please give us a rating and a review. I really appreciate it. And you can also listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Echo, Spotify, and yes, the podcast is also available now on our YouTube channel. You can help support the podcast by donating to it by giving up to $35 a month, where you will receive producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I'd like to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Seidentop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support. The link for the Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. And if you want to get a hold of me, my email address is cometman@cometman.net or on Twitter at ObserversNBPod. And until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.